first event apparently in LaMaMa down in Sierra's Theater, which is kind of amazing. So a lot thanks to them for letting us host this here. Let's go to line again. Everybody kind of introduce yourselves and what you're working on.
My name is Dan Butchko. I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called Playcrafting. We provide education and events for game developers and for people who want to get into game development. We do that here in New York. We have a branch in Boston, and in 2016 we're launching in Seattle and San Francisco.
Hi, my name is Yelena. I'm from the Future of Storytelling with Future of Storytelling, we create community platforms across storytelling in a very broad sense, bringing people together across various industries, creating exhibitions that feature all different works that we think are pushing the boundaries of storytelling. And I also used to work at Sundance New Frontier, which is the part of Sundance that tries to kind of push the boundaries of movie image.
Hey, I'm Omer. I'm the head of virtual reality at Playcrafting. It's an experiential agency. This is my third virtual reality job. Before that, I was at Framestore VR for like 10 years doing virtual reality, and also the NYU Media Research Lab. And I'm also a developer of a four-dimensional video game called Horizon. Some of my other partners in the game aren't here tonight.
Hello, hi, I'm CJ. I'm co-founder and co-director of Meow community events in New Jersey and New York. We do arcade style events that bring together hundreds of developers and craftspeople, and we also do workshops to connect to game education as well. Communities together, and the importance of bringing out the culture, play, and art.
Hello, my name is Clara Fernandez-Vara. I'm faculty at the NYU Game Center. A good deal of the games here actually come from the Game Center from our current students and alums. I work in narrative and games. I'm a game designer and a writer as well. I'm part of the work, and the reason why I'm here today is because I've done several curation events from the Boston Festival of Indie Games years ago to an exhibit at the MIT libraries to more recently, a couple of weeks ago, the New York Film Festival Convergence. I curated an exhibit of independent narrative video games.
My name's Kyle. I worked with Davis to help actually put on this event, and now we're crossways from each other.
Do you guys want to move to one side?
No.
I'll shift.
I think I'm just late.
Kyle's good enough to talk.
I hope to organize this panel. And then kind of in the spirit of this event, which some people may or may not know, the whole point of the event was to bring together a lot of local New York organizations who are involved in video games who may not already be talking to each other, and to kind of get them talking to each other and get the community interested in other organizations that are also interested in video games. So in the spirit of this, Davis and I tried to put together a panel of people that also kind of represent the broad spectrum of what's happening right now in video games. I like to loosely call this the new arcade. And my first question to the panel is actually like, is there a new arcade? And does this represent it? Or like, is it something completely different and we're missing the point? So I'd really like to answer that first.
I'm not sure if the arcade is the only model. I think that the arcade was one space which, back in the 80s was heavily gendered, so it was mostly for the idea that there were boys, although there were a lot of women who were very good at arcade games, and they were champions as well. But yeah, like the arcade is one model. We have galleries, we have museums, we can transform almost any space into a space of play. And each space is going to bring you something different. An art gallery, like I love the space setup here actually, because you're going from one space to another, but you can also transform, like we had a library where it was very quiet and there was only certain types of games that we could show. We could not be as loud as this. There are, for example, in MIT for the Boston Festival of Independent Games, we transform gymnasium and different classrooms into different play spaces and when we were showing games. So I don't know if there's a new arcade, but there's many different types of arcades, and depending on what you want to show, you're going to configure the space differently.
Also, I think people like socializing, and games are a great way to do that. Not just gaming, other types of interactive experiences. And it's where people want to meet other people in a new kind of space, kind of be an arcade. Just bring them all together and just kind of not things in that really cool way.
You don't have to go down the line. Don't feel like an answer.
We all have ideas. So yeah, I think like the major like distinction that arcades had at the time was like, it's a place where you could go and socialize, but also had video games. But it was also the only place where you had video games at the time. So like it was about the video games, but you would go and socialize, and a lot of your socialization process was through being at the arcade and watching other people play. And it's very different today from like where we have like all of these personal games, and they're actually becoming more personal. So if you're looking for experiences that you would have in an arcade, which are very physical and like very one-to-one, I'm talking here as like the virtual reality guy, so I'll say like this is like very, very far away from the case in virtual reality. Like we're extremely far away from having good interactions there, like that would mimic your interactions in real life. Like no game can mimic that. So I'd say like that's nowhere you would look. But we are like moving to a place that I call this the age of intimacy in games, where you are one with the game, and like the levels of your interaction with other people, if you're talking about MMOs or so on, are more like ambient presence. Like you are in the space, just like in Destiny, where how many people here play Destiny? Okay, not very many. So so I will say I haven't played a lot of it, but I have been watching other people at my office, like in an arcade play, actually. And a lot of the interactions that you will have there is that you are watching other people having conversations, but you can't hear them and so on. This is like it's an ambient presence, but you're very aware that they are in the space. So, and that's a sort of thing that you don't really have, you don't really have anything that's competing with actual real life in VR currently. So you look for the arcade experience elsewhere, and I think actually now that we have video games everywhere, arcades are basically more places to meet people, and nothing can take that away. So I guess like that may be a dead end in that way, and video games that live in arcades or are rather competitive will just take a step back and have either have some kind of physical dimension like they do today, or they would cease to exist.
So I'm probably one of the only people on this panel that don't really come from gaming background. And my entrance into gaming is more from the storytelling space. I'm really interested in how the bridge between kind of the narrative world and the gaming world is starting to be bridged in some way, and the definitions are changing of what game is and what a gamer is. And I imagine that's the same thing in the arcade space of what we traditionally thought of as arcade, and what we can now experience as arcade is beyond maybe just traditionally what we think of as games, and more different experiences, like virtual reality, like interactive gesture-based work, like things that are what, like I said again, aren't from this traditional set. So my interest in arcade is kind of how are we changing the definition of what was, and we're now thinking of arcade, and what we're now thinking of games.
Yeah, first of all, I like thinking of this as the age of intimacy. That's kinky. So let's just call this the age of intimacy. I tend to think that game-based events have kind of evolved with the tool sets available to developers. So now what we're seeing is that the line between gamer and game maker is now even blurring. So as the tool sets have been more accessible to people to get into gaming without having to have like a programming background, etc. People can just show up, even some of the folks tonight, some of the developers can just show up to an event with their laptop and show off a game. And it is very much the same experience as what one was getting out of an arcade before. But now, because the tool sets are a lot more accessible, and a lot more people are game developers than there was before, given that the tool sets are so accessible. Games have sort of infiltrated these other spaces because you can just kind of bring your laptop and show your game off.
Yeah, I think that's actually what's so attractive to me also to this as well, is that you can, it's almost like sharing an idea of like, here's what I've made, rather than going to just see some product of the company, but it's more of folks sharing something that they've created. That's actually something, so my curiosity is, what do you all think of, is there a line between an interactive art piece or a video game, and how does the line blur between like an arcade and like an art gallery, and does that seem like something that's interesting to you all, or you have thoughts on that?
Can I take this one? Yes.
Yeah, so I guess like since I came to video games through actually making interactive art before that, I will say it's definitely not both. Like there is the point that like a lot of interactive artists will battle with for a long time, which is people are misinterpreting my art, and a lot of so like media art in the past 10 years has always been people going to galleries which are way too noisy and way too crowded to allow a really intimate relationship with the piece of art that is being presented. And it's always like, people standing in front of a Kinect and moving their hand, and like a lot of other people are doing that as well, and something changes, and it's like, was it me? Was that guy? What's this actually doing? Oh, there's gold there, cool. And this happens a lot, right? This is, if anyone's been to a media art show, this is probably what you've seen to a very great extent, and you're always living off of the idea that, it's supposed to work. You never see it. And that, like, by the way, that is changing the more secluded from the rest of the people you are with this experience. And that is necessarily changing with the fact, like, that is changing now, the fact that like, the line between media art and games is blurred to the outside. But I will say, like, my distinction to this is when you let go, when you let people use the game in any way it's supposed to be used, that's a game, right? That's the only place where, like, if someone is allowed the freedom to explore inside your app, and it's it's targeted towards their exploration, you can safely call it a game and no one will disagree with you. But when you just build a very solid app that carves the path for the user to create something, like there are multiple apps like that on the Apple Store, like Bubble Harp by Scott Snivy is a really good example for that. It's sort of like a musical instrument, but it's also meant there for enjoyment because you can't really play the notes. If anyone has, you all have iPhones, right? Yeah. So if you want to download that app, it's very enjoyable. It's not a game. It's very much an app that's meant for art, and I guess that's because it's playing something to you and not letting you play it. Yeah, sure.
So, as my students who are here now, there is a formal definition of games that we care about in academia, but in practice I really don't care about. Because what we do in the Game Center, we're teaching game design, and in the long run, it's interaction design. One of our alums from our first year is actually working with an artist in augmented reality, and all the things that we taught him actually apply perfectly to augmented reality installations. So it's true that there's a blurriness between both. What is different in an art gallery setting, for example, is that there's a different barrier of entry. So when you go into an art gallery, and I know that here we have a very literate and knowledgeable people who go to art galleries, you know how to tackle a work of art. You know how to be challenged by a work of art, by a painting, by an installation. But when it comes to certain types of games, or whatever we want to call them, there are other barriers of entry, which are, how do you interact with it? Touchscreens make it very easy. People know how to touch and things react, and that's something that's very direct. But for example, in the exhibit that we set up at the New York Film Festival, some of the games are actually first-person games. And first-person games, two of them we were sharing Soma and everyone's gone to the Rapture, and those were using controllers. And controllers are very, very intimidating for people who don't consider themselves gamers. They don't even know how to hold it. It's got too many buttons. It's very scary. What was very interesting in the context of the New York Film Festival is that there were filmmakers there. So once the volunteers there explained to them that first-person games were like one controller is the point of view, is the camera, and the other is the dolly you're moving around, they got it. And I saw people who had never played a first-person game smooth through it because they understood the metaphor. But for most people, just a controller is something that is really intimidating. So that's one thing, you know, that the literacy of how to interact with a game can be, or what are the expectations when you're playing a game, can be a similar barrier of entry, or the type of literacy that we need to play a game is not that dissimilar to engage with any work of art.
So I curated an exhibit at the Museum of the Moving Image called Sensory Stories, and we had a wide variety of types of projects there. There was some virtual reality projects, there was some interactive iPad games, there was interactive Connect kind of sculpture thing, there was a few different kinds of works, and it's a general audience, and I think part of our thinking was in art museums, there's a different barrier of entry in how people understand something, but also the time they're willing to spend with something. So when you go to a gallery, when you play interactive art, you're going to be there for a couple minutes. To get into a game and to fully understand a game, it's... Especially narrative-based games. I mean, you can spend an hour on it, and no one's going to do that. So I guess if we're talking about putting out games in exhibition settings, it's understanding people's, what they're able to focus with in that time. Unless you create an intimate type of experience where it's a room and they're not pressured or crowded and they go into their dark space. We had Darkroom Sex Game, if you want to get sexy here.
Why are everybody pregnant being that?
I started
like that.
sexy.
Please keep going.
Intimate, sexy. But even with that, even in the private room with Darkroom Sex Game, have any of you guys played it? One, okay. It's this game where you, it's a haptic game with light bulbs, and the goal is to get it in this motion until basically you reach orgasm. And you know, people still didn't have as much patience for it, so it's more of the audience being cultured into understanding of how they should really get into it. And I think that either might take some time or really figuring out what kind of space will create that intimate environment for them to be able to focus.
It's kind of like touched on in the past few responses, but like this idea of orientation, all of you I think have a very interesting perspective into that. Like Dan, I imagine like will come to your events, might know the whole controllers, where it's like Yelena, like I don't know if you guys have controllers or sensory stories. So like, how do you, in the arcade, traditionally there was a panel that told you what to do, and you kind of go up, and every game was specifically designed for that experience, so you weren't bringing any extra knowledge into this like experience of having a prior understanding of how a joystick works. The game was kind of would tell you and it wouldn't tell you. You'd be selecting your character, so you do almost every single action within the first few seconds. So, I mean, to all of you, how do you deal with this issue of orientation, especially as games start penetrating into spaces that aren't necessarily filled with people who've played games before?
One obvious solution might sound like you put the instructions, but nobody reads the instructions. Anybody read the instructions? Never. Nobody reads the instructions, so don't put the instructions. In my case, when I've done exhibits, and part of my goal is making games more accessible to people, so it's using metaphors or controls that they're used to. So touchscreens, I mean, like the Sensory Stories had a bunch of iPad games. That's a good way of letting people feel comfortable. But also using computer games. People know how to use a mouse and a keyboard, or just a mouse. It usually is a metaphor that they might understand. When we did the exhibit at the MIT libraries, we had two games that were more arcadey. There was an adaptation of The Great Gatsby as an NES game that you don't play is great. And there was another one that was an adaptation, a free adaptation of Oedipus Rex. As a platformer, we had to type in. It's called Get One Word. They're all online, you can all play them. And those were the more arcadey games, and we actually kept track of who had played what, and they were the least played. The two that people played the most was the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the text adventure game, and another text adventure game that was inspired by Shakespeare's works, Avon. And it was because we had the impression that the librarians themselves were actually playing. And even though the problem, like having to type in what you want to do can be very intimidating. Interactive fiction in that respect can be really intimidating to people because you have to know the conventions. They knew how to type, like the idea, oh, I'm just talking to the computer. So we did have a very brief set of instructions on how to play with those games, but I think that making the technology not scary when people are not used to it, like put an Xbox 360 and it has to look very pretty in order for people to be curious. Looking pretty is always a good thing. But yeah, the technology, it has to be something that is familiar. The moment that you have things that I mean, like a VR set can be really cool, but you have to have somebody, it cannot run on its own.
I figured out how to do it.
Yeah. Yes. So you have to either provide have a volunteer kind of guiding people, or be something that can run on its own because people are familiar with the conventions.
Just on the VR comment, so with Sensory Stories, the challenge with it was that it wasn't just a weekend, it was a 3-month-long period. So we had to figure out how can we make this technology work with very, very minimal staffing for 3 months. So specifically with VR, I was having nightmares for months trying to figure out how it's going to work. We actually made the VR so that on the it restarts with a push button. I created a USB button on it, so people would just press the button, put it on themselves, and it would restart. And that was just our easy genius plan, and it worked. And so you guys can all take this plan if you would like. But as far as how to exhibit games, I had a challenge with using kind of consoles or mouses or screens, because for me, I registered like a computer screen as just my out of focus work and going to the web and all the million clicks, because I think we all associate the computer with this like unfocused searching the internet and going back and work in a sense. So I tried to somewhat get away from that and think about, and that was just me personally, because I don't come from a gaming background, and that's when I see a computer screen, I'm in an art setting, I'm not compelled to go towards it. That was my thinking on it.
I have a rather pessimistic view about this. I think it doesn't really matter. Like the changes that are going through technology do not change the way you are building your experience, or rather, maybe they enable new experiences. But if you have an ideal experience of walking in the woods, you will not change it because technology now allows you to simulate footsteps. You will build something that does that specifically. And the level of dexterity and the level of skill will always dictate what you do with your game or your piece of interactive art. You won't take a newbie in chess and just put it in front of a grandmaster, because there's no handicap in chess. So there's no way to just make that game enjoyable or rather interesting for both people. There is, by the way, in Go. So there are games that allow you to do that. But what I'm saying is there are currently games where you just hand someone an iPhone and they're ready, and there are, on the other hand, the expert games, kind of like Dwarf Fortress. Who's heard of Dwarf Fortress here? Okay, great. Thank you, 10 people. So there are games that take years to learn and master, just like chess is. But you're not competing against other people. You're competing against a very, very evil computer to just be able to control the game itself. And that's not going to change in VR, right? Or in any modern presentation. I mean, because I work for advertising, and it's kind of silly, the VR experiences that I make are dead simple to master. You just put the thing on, there's one button, and you're guided. It is supposed to be simple because people should enjoy it in less than 3 minutes and move on with their lives. Whereas, personally, as a game maker, I don't want to have a world that's made of all these simple things. I want to have something that people can dive into. But that would not be the distinction. Like, people mentioned here before, it's like, oh, you have a controller. Controllers are, once you get them, they're dead simple. But media art doesn't necessarily have that because the granularity of mapping changes according to how much you want to allow the user to have the interaction, well, a meaningful interaction anyway. So what I'm saying, what I'm getting at with all this is, we're able to make many more things now. Like we have touch controllers, we have like haptic transducers on every, there's like 4 different vibration motors in the new PlayStation controllers, and still we're making the games more or less feel the same because we want to have the same verbs in them. And as soon as we have games that have more verbs in them or experiences that have different things to do, and that's purely up to our imagination, we will find ways to make them, controllable.
There were a couple of projects that my partner and I worked on where it was designed specifically for large groups of people, and we decided relying on a touchscreen because we realized it's the closest thing for people to understand that there's like a one-to-one relationship with what you're doing and what is being reflected on screen. And another project, you're controlling objects, you just need directional buttons and then a single button to switch between the different modes. In a sense, so you need direction and one single button. One single button, but we designed a specific controller for that as well, and that's a lot easier for people to understand. But as soon as you give someone an Xbox controller, they look at it strangely. It's very, for a person who understands games, to see that, it's a very stark realization. The events that we do, the arcade events that we do, they're a bit more ephemeral. They're last only about 3-4 hours, and we're lucky enough to have the creators there, which plays a big part in having attendees kind of talk to creators and understand where they're coming from, how they design certain things, and the blurred lines between interactive experience and games and art. It's always difficult to kind of define these things because I never feel a need that there needs to be definitions. Because the ones that are blurred are the ones that I think people remember the most, are the most interesting. You have panoramical in there, just controlling things all. You're not really sure if you're doing the right thing, but it doesn't matter because it looks like you're doing the right thing. So it's pretty cool.
So one thing I love about the Playcrafting events that we do and curating those events is that for us to lower the barrier of entry for people that maybe have never picked up an Xbox 360 controller is to have a diversity of games there. So you'll see like a student project right next to a larger studio project, and that goes on the genre side of things as well. So in terms of the crowd that's there, you'll get a lot of people that are strictly just gamers, and maybe those are like, maybe they're super casual gamers that are like just playing Candy Crush Saga on the subway or something. You're laughing at me. Yeah, there you are. So what we'll do is we'll have another match 3 puzzle game there. We'll have an endless runner game there. But perhaps right next to that game is a super weird outside the box Oculus Rift game or something like that. And maybe it's a match 3 puzzle game that like hooks someone in. Maybe they saw that on like the invite and that got them excited to go to the event because it's something that they recognize. But our hope is that while they're there, they're experiencing the diversity of games and the different genres, and maybe that'll be an entry point into trying out a VR game or picking up a PS4 controller for the first time.
Yeah.
You asked the question. Do it.
So some of you that are closer to the developers, like She's Meow, you guys are both a curation studio and like in-house development team.
We've kind of just opened up, so all the developers that come in, all the developers, it's an open call, essentially, and almost everyone gets in to show their games. And we really reach out to a lot of developers because we do push for diversity and inclusivity in our events. And do a lot of calls to get from interactive experiences to tabletop games and installation types, because it's really interesting to have everything next to one another, because people see it all together and they don't realize how similar they may be. I don't know, it's weird to say that, but they are very similar. And
There wasn't a question there.
oh, okay.
Yeah, so just like the people that are closer. Yeah, this is so part 2 of my non-question. Is it the people who are closer to developers? Do you feel that because these things are going to sit next to each other, like at what point in the development cycle do people kind of decide where they want this to be shown? So when you did Kentucky Route Zero at Gamescapes, like I don't think that Tomas and the other guy, I can't remember his name, Jay, they set out to say, okay, this will be shown and have it next to film, even though it came from film. So do you think that it is like a burden of developers to have to know they'll be shown off, or is it something that you have to just kind of anticipate and design now that games are being shown in other places?
It's interesting because there's maybe this is what, going back to the media art question, maybe that's one of the difference between making games and making media art. Like if you're looking at doing an installation, there are certain games that you know are going to be in a space in an exhibit. So for example, for those people who might know the work of Kahoade, she's making games that are physical and they actually do very well in a gallery space, for example. But I work in narrative games, and the kinds of games that we showed in the New York Film Festival actually demo awfully. Those of us who work in adventure games and that related genre, they demo really badly. The kind of action games show better because there's a kind of like noise and all that, but going back to the idea of an intimacy, of going to the space, you need your, it's kind of like trying to read a book in a club, in a music club, right? Is not, it doesn't lend itself to that. And yet, there are other ways in which you can show a narrative game of that type that do not involve a gallery space, but one of the things that I've done are actually readings of adventure games, both text adventure games, but also point and click. Because if you know this genre, point and click adventure game, things like Machinarium, or even things like The Walking Dead, if you're familiar with it, they are naturally multiplayer. So you can put a projector like this, and we could all be here. And actually, we could actually try to play Makisar the whole room and tell the person piloting, like, go here, talk to this person, do this. And it's a different way of doing it. It's a participatory way of doing it. It's not as intimate, but it actually works kind of like, it's not like watching a movie, but more like an interactive movie. I've done it with text adventure games where we had 2 actors reading the text in a room full of people, and people were shouting out commands, and there was somebody typing them in. And it was like interactive radio theater. So the idea is that first you have to find what clicks, and this might sound surprising, but those games that are very intimate and single player, narrative games, can also do very well as a performance, in a performance space.
You basically said it all.
I'll say something else too. I do feel like if you take it out of just the gamer space and put it into kind of a non-gamer gallery or a certain space, people respond more to something where they have more of a visceral experience, or it's an emotional experience at first, versus coming into it cerebrally. So something that like draws you in, they'll get more into it than something that they have to solve puzzles at first. That's kind of what I'm finding.
And also,
and also, when there's a game where there's puzzles and there's a whole room, it's easier to solve them because there's more people thinking at the same time. Whereas if they're on their own, they might feel stupid. But if they're hearing other people think, they all feel empowered to continue.
Yeah, and we work with a lot of developers that are brand new to making games, since we do have the education component as well. So our events often have developers that really just want to get their games in the hands of players because they'll use it for playtesting. A lot of developers have a lot of trouble finding people for playtesting, so having these events for playtesting of games that are not yet done is extremely helpful to them. And at the same time, what we like to show to even just people that are general gamers, general public, is that game development is an iterative process. When someone is playing on the subway, like the Match 3 puzzle game, it might be the only game they're playing, and they're thinking to themselves, how in the hell is this made? So what we like to show is throughout the different events, people can come and see how that game is progressing, how perhaps their feedback was incorporated into it, and we've seen it's been really helpful for developers.
Do you have any other thoughts, Kyle?
Yeah.
Let's do one more question. Wrap up, yes. Or we're gonna go the whole hour.
Yeah. I mean, I was just so like.
How are you guys doing?
How's everyone?
Yeah.
4 hours. The rest of the night. Run this panel.
What are you guys doing next Tuesday?
Yeah. Cancel your plans. So like what you said is interesting because you're saying that there's some games that like make sense may make sense to be played collectively versus as a single player, like Walking Dead. But this kind of I feel like it's potentially like counter to the success of things on Twitch, like Twitch plays Pokemon or like Twitch plays Dark Souls, where it's like if you inject this communal element into like any game, it instantly becomes interesting. So if there's some way to make that experience be live, then like maybe we're missing something, because what we do here is very much just like a bigger screen analog of playing things at your house. So like I'm wondering if there's some way we should like show games where we're kind of working like antithetical to how a game may be intended to be played, but we're doing it for the sake of like the event and community. So when people come, it's not just, oh, I can like go home and download this game and play like a better version of this in my headphones, where it's like, oh, we can come to the space and like yell at 30 people with the screen and play Dark Souls together. So that's next Tuesday. And kind of related to that, like how important do you guys and what you do is like the space itself to showing and displaying and curating games?
So like I said before, since a lot of events can now just be someone showing up with their laptop, but for us I don't think that the facilities itself are important. I mean, as long as there's like Wi-Fi and outlets. For us, what we found is partnering with venues that might attract new audiences to the games. So we host a lot of our events at Microsoft, and people may not know any of the games on the list because there are a lot of smaller, local, independent games, but people know Microsoft. So they'll say, oh, I recognize that, this must be a legit thing, and that's a way to kind of get them in the door in terms of the venue.
I would say it's pretty important, and to Clara's point about you don't want to read a book in a nightclub. So you're not going to play a game that's meant just for you when there's so much noise. You're just not going to last very long in it. So for games that are specifically supposed to be one person and not participatory, I think having it in a place that's conducive towards that is important. Having something that's more participatory and more of a show, have that in more of a kind of a public space. And I do want to make a comment on virtual reality because I feel like it solves a lot of these problems, because you just put it on your head, you put on your headphones, and you're just not distracted in any place that you are. You can't even look at your phone, so that can kind of go anywhere.
That needs to be solved, by the way.
No, seriously, like a lot of people that I like, a lot of teenagers that I have testing virtual reality, like will do the thing of like trying to raise their hand as if like, where the fuck is my phone? And seriously, and like to the point that I wanted to do a selfie stick simulator. Yeah, I want to actually start this out with a story that I've heard from like a producer I was working with a few days ago. He said that he was watching the original Matrix, like what is it, 15 years ago, in Mount Washington, the cinema in Mount Washington. So like outside town, not a lot of people know, like not a lot of people are familiar with visual effects in general, and it was so packed that people sat in the aisles basically. And as soon as the first bullet time effect showed up, people were like standing up and like, did you see this? Did you fucking see this? And they were so psyched. And I think like, you know, if you have that and you have like people being excited by games in the same way, in places like that where you're supposed to basically have an intimate experience with like a film. Because normally the way you see films, like you sit down and like something really painful is happening in front of your face, and but you feel this, like you aren't alone with that pain, but you're also with everyone else in the room, right? You are experiencing like the pain of like having the lead character die or whatever with like everyone else in the room, and you're still having a very intimate experience. Then that is the sort of thing, that is the sort of future that did not exist in arcades, and where, you know, like I gave that example to show that, well, actually these spaces can be used for some kind of interaction, but basically the setting could be a hybrid between like having like this personal communal experience and communicating. And you know, it's like virtual reality, to give an example that everyone's giving, not for any reason that I came here for, is very helpful in that, but also very, very damaging in that, because if you are in that space and everyone is watching you with your virtual reality headset on, you will see that the previous person is like going through all of this pain, but all of the eyes are on him. So rather than doing that, I suggest a different kind of like communal experience in that way. What if everybody, instead of looking at the person, would look at what the person is experiencing while he is experiencing that, like you are in the movie theater. So you are witnessing their pain, just like they are witnessing their pain alone. And that is something that allows you to be, instead of like the star of a karaoke show, which is not the thing you want to be doing when you're so vulnerable inside VR, you want to be like a person in the film, maybe even the star of the film, but not notice that you're a star of the film. And actually the best portrayal of that I've ever seen with VR in general is in Rick and Morty. Did everyone see the episode of virtual reality in Rick and Morty? Yeah, it was a story of like, they went into this arcade, one guy put the headset on, and he just started living someone's life, and like everybody watched the steps of his life, and there were comments like, oh my god, he's taking that guy off the grid, he doesn't have a social security number, and everyone was really excited. And I really think that, you know, that is what communal VR should be. One person playing, all the people, instead of watching the person going like this, watching actually experience it and experiencing it themselves.
Do you watch it on a screen, or do you watch it?
I don't know, how would you?
Well,
No, seriously, how would you?
I'm really obsessed right now with communal VR, so everyone kind of having a shared experience, so they're all watching a headset. I think people are working on that, but I think if someone's just watching a screen, it's just not the same kind of effect.
I don't know. What if it were?
Sorry, what if it were a spirit? Like, so, yeah, I've had some ideas on this, obviously. But what if this were, you know, like rather a spherical theater, and you could be watching all around, but so you do see the person like going through the agony of doing whatever he's doing, or she or they, and also like being in that space, so you can look at the monster that's coming at it, or I don't know, like the event of their mother dying, or whatever is going on in that VR experience, and you can immerse yourself in it because you can look wherever, but you are feeling that pain through proxy because it's not the headset on. You still have some distance from that person.
I'm just going to say one last thing. It's just so fun to watch people in VR. That's so funny. That's its own kind of theater.
So we're a completely volunteer-driven organization. So we look for venue spaces, basically anything that can kind of accommodate what we like in terms of size and capacity and all that. Our previous event at NY Game Center, we hosted our event there, and we always check out the space. And in a sense, it's experience design on the organizer's part, because we have to realize, you know, what we have to work with. And because there's such a diverse range of games, like, you don't want to play a tabletop game when you're surrounded by 4 local multiplayer games. That's awful for both the creator and the players. So we kind of work together to figure out a good layout. So if you're starting at this point noise would carry over and take considerations like that. So yeah, in a sense, strange experience exhibit design stuff, which is very challenging, and it's not perfect yet, but like every time we do an event, we always like figure out, like talk to all the developers afterwards, all the creators, and like what worked, what didn't work, and how we can make the action better for you.
You know, like when you're setting up an exhibit, like, I put on my game designer hat because it's basically level design. I kind of have to make do with the spaces that you're given. I've set up exhibits in classrooms and a library and corridors, and you know, like at times you don't have. If you have a gallery space, it's pretty cool. because that's actually designed to hold people and show people around. But the space is really going to set up the mood. So for example, when we did Boston Festival of Independent Games, we were setting up in classrooms, and that set a kind of casual grassroots. We were all cramped, and it was all too hot. Air conditioning is one thing that you really have to check when you're setting up your exhibit space, because these things are very popular too. I mean, we see it here. This is really cramped. It's really great. But what happened is that it really sets the tone of almost like a science fair, which is fine because that's what we wanted. That was the tone of the festival in general, versus doing it in an art gallery, versus doing it in the library where it has to really be actually quiet. But at times, there are also practical things that there's an advantage of being able to bring your laptop and show your game, right? That's the beauty of it, that we can do it anywhere, and this portability is really important. But on the other hand, there's practicalities like, can the plugs in the room actually sustain all the things being plugged in at the same time? Because this happened to us at the Boston Festival of Indie Games. We were in classrooms, we checked with facilities and said like, hey, we're going to have a gazillion computers being plugged in every classroom. Is this okay? So, they asked us, are you going to plug in any printers? No, we're going to plug in a lot of laptops, computers, probably TVs. I'm like, it's fine. Of course, there were developers who brought huge televisions, and our fuse blew after 1 hour, of course. We didn't know what the fuse was. Everybody was very confused. We were running cables. And
that's printers there, man. You just
we still do the printers, but they didn't count on the 42-inch television that somebody was going to bring. Of course, you blew the fuse. But, there are things that are practicalities about, like how you make people navigate, putting all the games together that are similar, so like board games in one area, multiplayer in one area, the narrative games in the quiet corner, kind of like trying to classify the games as well is very interesting. But I think that in a way, because they're portable, they can transform the space where you are, but it also, there's a kind of synergy between the attitude of the people who come. So the New York Film Festival, the people who are coming to Convergence were more willing to interact with things, even if they come from film. They're like, well, if it's here, maybe it's for me. Whereas if it was an arcade or if it was something that was advertised as a video game, as a video game event, they would be like, oh no, I'm not a gamer. I get that a lot working in games. I'm sure that you all here, like when you say that you work in video games, you're like, oh, I don't play games.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's very rude, right? I don't know if anybody in other professions get it, but I get it all the time. I play games, and I think that by putting the game in a different context, you're also making it like maybe it's not a game because it's in an art gallery, or maybe because it's in a film festival or in a museum. So that's part of the design of it, the mood of it, and the attitude is also important in terms of the space.
I just have one more question, and then we'll open it up. If you guys have any questions, is like how do you capture a reception of what you do? Especially Dan, you guys have so many people coming in through Playcrafting. What are the feedback mechanisms that you kind of judge? Like, oh, this worked or didn't work? And I think Omer and Yelena as well. I guess PJ and Clara, all of you. Everyone on the panel, I think, has done things in which people want to respond to. So you can set up these spaces, but is there any way that we can then self-correct over time and say oh, okay, this didn't work? And something outside of an exit survey, yeah.
Well, when you ask people directly, you can ask them, but people are going to be polite when you ask face-to-face. Surveys can help, but it's also kind of awkward. Did you like it? Yes, and do the survey. So usually what you do, and part of it, again, from being a game designer, I'm used to watching people interact and what they're doing. So you see people's faces, you see, are they smiling, are they comfortable, are they uncomfortable? You know, like, is there a good ambiance? Like, here's this really good ambiance, which is the right size of the, you know, it's not too empty. When it's too empty, nobody plays. If it's too full, people are not playing either. So this kind of like measuring the room and being able to read people, but also using things like social media, like Twitter. That's when people are on, especially like in the internet, everybody is a bit meaner. So yeah, like there's asking people, but in person they're going to be more polite. You know, checking social media, but also just looking around. I think that's, you know, documenting it through photographs and videos. And then when people start asking you, like, when are you going to do it again, then you know that you have success.
Yeah, the point about Twitter is actually really important. A lot of times what helps is a personalized hashtag that you want everybody to use so that they can kind of voice their opinions through that in chat, through that hashtag. A survey, I mean, it's in old fashioned, but I think it's still a good way to get people's opinions. And keeping it anonymous helps a lot too, so they feel safe about sharing their thoughts. And oftentimes organizers, I'm a developer too, we organize and we never show our own games. It's kind of crazy because we're too busy running around and checking to see if this creator's okay, that creator's okay, and making sure everybody kind of have as best of a time as you hope that they do. And so, yeah, organizers are always running around and checking things, and it's a lot of making sure like what's happening, what's not happening, and just writing that all down, and also following up with the developers. We always follow up with all the creators that show up, again, to see like what worked, what didn't, and how can we make better.
Yeah, I guess there are a few approaches I know about getting proper feedback and also like getting proper reception, which are two different goals, by the way. I guess in the film world, like one of the things that happens is if you go to a test screening, you immediately are given a scorecard for the event of the film. For those who don't know, test screenings are usually done by large Hollywood companies to see what the reception will be for the general public. But they're usually done with members of the general public, not like friends of friends. Like it will be like a screening, but people are NDA'd in the beginning, which is hilarious. And then you're given a test card to talk about like the film, and like the editor actually reads those comments, which is amazing. Walter Murch, who's been editing, he edited Cold Mountain and things. Well, I won't repeat it since the '60s. He found that actually 24 hours after the film is the best time to ask people, not like the night of. Which is like, that's a really good comment for like a game in general. You should be left with some of the sediment and like, relax into it and so on. So that's one thing. The other thing is like, especially in VR, one of the things that will happen is because this medium is so early, it's actually, it's actually not a medium. Because this type of experiences is so early and so intimate. That I'm sorry, I just keep repeating this, but it's true. So this type of experience is so down to like your very nerve endings. What will happen is that you have to monitor the user because they will not be able to express what they're feeling all the time. You keep calling it user, viewer, player, whatever. It's like they're not able to describe what they're feeling. Also because not a lot of developers know a lot about neuroscience, so that is not really helpful when you're talking that way. But like a lot of times what you'll have is like, oh, I don't like this is too close, or I don't like this, I feel too tall, or I don't like this, the space is making me anxious. Yeah, well, nauseous, but like really just even if you're in a small space, and a lot of times, a lot of the power that you have as a developer for VR games is enormous. You can be really cruel to people really easily, and this is not. Yeah, it's not a thing to be like. It is so simple to traumatize people in VR. I installed one experience in Sundance Festival about a year ago. Meryl, the thing with the.
Traumatized by Meryl?
I traumatized someone by Meryl. Yeah, I have. So I was developing this experience. So there was this experience like that people would walk around on a bridge and the bridge would collapse, and then like there was a giant like rock fall and wind, and you were covered by dust and you had to reach the end. And I filmed this one lady through like the monitors of the event that was really not enjoying it, and she was shouting out loud, and she was holding onto the walls, and she would be walking like a step and going like, and doing another step and so on. And this is like, this is exactly the sort of thing that I should not be subjecting people to, I felt really bad doing that sort of thing. And that's, so, you know, like user testing, and especially user testing in diversity, is super important before the event. The events are a really good place to, you know, to do this sort of thing and conclude, okay, this is ready for the general public or not. But this is not the sort of place where you should be testing for the first time what it would feel like to put your, you know, to put the people in, like, I don't know, the hands of a serial killer or something. It's just not. VR is way too close to your nerve ends to do that, which is why you should be testing early on. So, yeah, so last comment about this. I heard Joichi Ito, who's the head of the MIT Media Lab, a while ago, speaking about his position. He doesn't have an academic degree, whereas normally people in that position are PhDs. And he says that, like, organizing research for him is kind of like being a DJ, which he was, like actually in an industrial club. So, you know, it's like changing the music so more people come to the dance floor and interact in specific ways, and like once in a while making people go to the bar, you know, like putting something down tempo for having people relax. And I think that's something that you should be doing. Like, you know, people at organizing gaming events should be like that in the way that they're curating for a specific audience, but they're also curating during the event. It cannot be like a club, you know, an EDM club full of like horny teenagers where everyone is just trying to get something all the time. It has to be something that comes in waves, because normally when you're walking through gaming events, you are intimidated by the amount of people coming to you with an iPhone with a really creepy look on their face, like, hey, you want to try my game? And it's like really, really not comfortable to do that, because you should be immersing yourself in games, and the result is not something that I would call trust. So a lot of times, you know, when you come to events, you should be allowing people to travel rather than having people come to the guests. And a lot of that is noise control. A lot of that is, unfortunately, putting less games in space. I'm sorry. Or maybe spacing it out more, which is a real problem in New York, or also spreading out through more time. But that makes these games more enjoyable, and curation is a large deal of it. Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Piano Journey, I forgot the original question. What was it?
Oh, feedback.
Oh, feedback, right. Okay, but also to your comment on trauma, I think Meryl, which they matched the physical to the virtual, was an incredible experience. That's probably that person's fault for not liking it. There was a traumatizing game at Sundance about date rape, which I think should have done testing before it came. I would say I judged the feedback based on when I would give tours. Whichever project kind of gave people that twinkle in that eye, that's kind of when I knew that it worked. That's it.
Yeah, if you give surveys to people, you'll tend to either get like the 3 people who have this like transcendent experience and it was so amazing, or like the 1 person who didn't get enough pizza and absolutely hates everyone that's there. So I keep it really simple. I just think it's very much numbers based the way we work. So if we're just doing so many events that if we're doing the same event and I changed one thing, usually I'm like thinking this is like a 1962 computer that's like has like 1,500 dials on it, and I'll dial like 1 variable at a time. And if turning that variable a little bit meant that we had more people show up, then I'm going to turn that variable a little bit more.
Awesome. Does anybody have any questions? All right.
Yeah.
This is a question.
Stage behind you, so.
Hi.
How's it going?
We're twins. So this is a question about intimacy and VR and putting it into context, because I recently had a VR experience and my mind was blown, and it's happened a few times. I liked it, but it's sort of nihilistic feeling, and I guess I remember people telling me about when movies were first created, the train was coming at you, people would run out of the theater, and I wonder if I'm just not jaded enough yet to VR. I don't want to be, and I'm wondering, in the moment of having your mind blown in a virtual reality experience, what is that like? I don't know, and then people start telling me, are we really in a hologram? No, I think that way. Does anyone have something to say?
Why?
I feel like that you would have something to say about that.
I actually do.
Like back to the neuroscience question, we don't have enough studies, and people are studying the neuroscience of how VR makes you feel, and the feeling of presence and actually being there, and that not being able to distinguish reality from non-reality. I don't personally think that's true yet. I know I'm in VR.
Well, I mean, like the thing. Okay, first, what I love about like all these discussions about VR, and like I've been in a ton of panels where there's like 5 panelists and it's about VR, and only 2 have tried VR, and it's the thing that is really great about this is that everybody's faking it right now. Like there are so many unknowns in this. Also, don't forget that this is not a medium yet. It's really not a medium. We don't know how many pixels we're pushing into like the headsets. It's different between headsets. It's not even, is it about pixels? Is it about like haptics? Is it about sound? We don't virtual reality is a concept in that way. It's not like television. Television is well defined. And so when you have a VR experience, like you are basically talking about an experience of being somewhere. And there is no one-to-one mapping between that and the Oculus, because I've seen people just pipe films into the Oculus where you couldn't move your head, which is crazy. And yeah, it's like, right? You just watch it like on a table. And what I'm saying is that with this is like, the point, you will discover so many more things, and I have discovered so many things that can tweak someone's perception, like making them walk in the wrong direction. We're known theoretically for years, but like their impact is not known because not a lot of studies have been made. I mean, I'm trying to think about I grew up in late 80s, early 90s. Became a teenager in the 90s. A lot of the studies about television, like color television, that's been available 20 years prior to that, 30 years prior to that, like in the country I grew up in, like Israel, it was available for like 20 years at that time. Color television. The main studies about its effect were only like late 90s, right? Like early to late 90s. That were the main studies of teenagers watching television now, 4 to 6 hours a day. Here's what they do. Science-concerned parents. Like VR will take a while until like that neuroscience is available to for anyone to use. So I guess like there's no point in saying like, oh, this is worrying or so on, because like trust me, we'll become very commercial and very successful. And a lot of these problems will be solved or nothing will sell. It's just like that. So by the time it's like that, we'll start talking about long-term effects, but we won't start talking about the TV is flickering. Why? That's not going to be the first question about VR. Oh, I feel dizzy. Why? It will be something deeper than that. So I would say just like, let's all wait to hear about like what VR is in a year and a half. And then start have that. Yeah.
So I've done a bunch of VR, not in exhibits, not yet, it's a bit too much. But I think that, to answer your question, there's part of the novelty of VR that we don't do it often enough, that once you put on the helmet, and if it's something that is well done, you get this all like, oh my god, I'm somewhere else. I don't know if anybody's been able to do the HTC Vive demo. Which is very well done. It's like it's demoing the technology, and I think that we have to go past the technology. Yelena had a very good point that part of it is the feeling of presence, that you're there, that you don't get sick when you put it in your VR, but also having interesting stories to tell and using. So, for example, in the New York Film Festival Convergence, there was this interactive film, a VR film called The Dark House, and you would sit down around a dinner table. Yes. Yeah. But the thing is, like, I actually got super sick. I usually don't get motion sickness during VR. I was a mom. Yes, I was a mom who is an alcoholic, and she drinks a lot, and her head moved more, and that really made me queasy. But part of the wonder of the Dark House was that each person has a different point of view of the story. And when I was going through it, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I'm feeling sick. I don't know if I'm going to last through this whole thing. But then removing the helmets and sharing the experience, that's when it kicked in how good it was. And I think that for me, VR is going to kick in, and this, the kind of like mind blown is not about the technology itself, but what we're doing, and that this is shared experience. The problem with VR is that it's an isolating, like the idea that you put on your headphones, you're in this thing, you might have this controller, and you're somewhere else, but you want to share. You want to share that awe. You want to share what you thought of it. And so far, it's just a gimmick of the technology, not really the content, how you're engaging with characters, how you're engaging with the space itself. Is more about, look, this technology makes you feel like you're somewhere else, which is great, but now we have to go past the gimmick and actually tell interesting stories or create interesting environments.
One or two more questions? Yeah? Oh, over there. You don't have to sit on the chair? I was worried about the speaker.
Yeah.
Hi, Joel has a question.
Yes.
Wow, this is fun. Hi. So I'm a high school teacher in a high-need school in New York City, and where I find video games kind of intersecting in my experience now is I try to get kids to apply the skills that they learn in games. Portal, right? It's like, what are you doing in Portal spatially? Where are you, right? Or like Assassin's Creed, like, why is Machiavelli in here? What's going on? So try to apply these skills to their studies, but in the end, it's still just applying something that's remote to something that's in the classroom. So like, let's look at this text and see what we can find. So coming from an environment where we're often lucky to have a working projector, like Wi-Fi, right? Not every kid has an iPad or a phone that they can access with. Where do you see the future of video games or educational technology in general in schools?
It's like a different topic, but in my other life, I was working with the education ArtCade at MIT. They had a lot of the problems. They were designing games for schools, and as you're saying, a lot of the technology is outdated or not working. My colleagues were making games that had to run on Netscape. And this was, 4 years ago. So, after Netscape was long dead and gone, they had to make sure that it worked in every platform.
You can't access the New York City payroll website with Internet Explorer 9 or more. So you have to go to Wayback Machine, download Internet Explorer 7 to access the payroll portal website. Like, that's New York City, guys.
But it's true that even if kids don't have smartphones, there is going to be a lot of small games, maybe things like Twine, for example, that run on almost any browser. So the thing with that, there's a space of smaller games that on the one hand are really good for this kind of exhibit, for example, but also that encourage kids to make their own and see that they could make them. Because tools are accessible, I don't know if you want to respond to that, but the idea that there are more accessible tools, you don't need a console to play a game, you don't even need a smartphone, if you have access to a browser, there's going to be plenty there, and there's even tools that work online to make those games. So.
Yeah, when I think of this is a dirty word to some people, but gamifying. When I think about sort of the gamification of education, education already is sort of a game in and of itself. It's goals driven. Instead of saving a princess, you're trying to get an A. So even I think it's a matter of, especially in areas that have populations in need, it's a matter of kind of taking what's exciting about learning and lowering the barrier for making it exciting. So not relying so much on a screen, perhaps, because maybe certain schools don't have the budget for it. But making sort of the goals-driven experience more exciting and enriching so people actually, or kids actually find it exciting to learn, as opposed to read that chapter, now we're going to have a quiz, snooze fest.
Hey.
Well, I also think that digital natives, which I guess is the generation after me, are, they know how to swipe an iPad before they can turn a page, so they're being brought into schools expecting a very participatory type of experience, more so than the experience that we're traditionally set with schools. So I think in order for them to actually be able to concentrate after a certain point, it's going to need to be gamified, or to make them feel like they're a more important part of the experience than just someone sitting quietly in class and maybe answering a question once a week. But there's, like Google's doing Google Expeditions, which is VR within classrooms where they go on field trips with their virtual reality devices, which is starting to become available. I also have a friend who's creating a whole curriculum at schools, which is gamifying a whole curriculum where they take a curriculum and turn it into some really incredible storyline. They've actually seen really incredible results of kids becoming much more active and getting much higher test scores within that type of experience.
Do you know the name of that?
I will find out right after this.
Yeah, I'm going to be the technical optimist here and say that it's not going to be a problem. I'm sorry, it's just not going to be a problem. Like, having the access to the technology, like if it's a problem now, it won't be a problem in 5 years. Like everyone will have at least like an old generation smartphone, which is powerful enough to do a lot of things. And as far as like math education goes, it is so below the current technological requirements to get something really satisfying out of a very, very simple program that is only math tricks. And I'm talking about like making games, a first generation iPhone is orders of magnitude more powerful than a Super Nintendo. Enough said, right? Like if you can, and we have like a ton of game engines right now, and like in the past 4 years I've worked with 4 game engines. We've had a ton of game engines, 6, that can do like make the really simple math really enjoyable. It just has to be there just has to be a curriculum around it. So long story short, I don't think it's a problem, and or rather 5 years from now I don't think it's going to be a problem. And if you have programs for one laptop per child, putting really engaging math games in the laptops, we just need to wait until it assimilates. Because if you love math and you want to do that sort of thing, then you have all the tools and you have like significant access, like in terms of language difficulties and in terms of like even like handicap accessibility to it than you would have ever had. So it's just question of willpower at this point. I'm only addressing sciences because I really don't know how to sell history to kids. That's you can address that. So that's that. I seriously don't think that's a problem.
I've been really lucky to teach middle school, high school, and college students at various, from less privileged to more privileged. And because these tools, we talk about this accessibility a lot, and they are available, and some of them are probably not as famous as like what Scratch would be, and others, they are available, and people are really generous, not just generous, like so forward-thinking to want to keep making these tools. They are available. And also, it should never stop at something being digital. Analog is just as powerful as digital, and I don't think technology should ever be technology is very much a barrier, but it should never be the thing that dictates what you want people to learn. I don't know if I'm putting that right, but technology is, needs to be something.
Thank you.
One more question? Chris, thank you for periscoping this.
Video game curation on like a mass level, like a consumer level, it sucks. Like it's terrible. Like if you go on Steam, if you go on PlayStation, there's no curation. Steam is curated by the general public and PS4, whatever. How do you see the role of in-person curators factoring into a larger scale systems that don't support curation?
Well, that's happening.
How do you not support curation, by the way? It's just sorry. How do you mean not support curation? How do you mean?
They're mass systems of people leverage and kind of like random, like the App Store, for example. But the App Store
is curated.
It's already curated, yeah. And Steam itself actually has this like the feature curation, so like you can make your own lists. If you know, so you can follow specific organizations, you can follow specific people. You know, you have the Indie Mega Booth, for example, has their own curated collection of games that are featured in the Mega Booth.
Right.
So people are realizing that it's really broken. The way that the App Store and Apple's App Store works is that either you know somebody or you have a great marketing team that goes through. It's not really curation; it's marketing. Whereas I think that there's going to be if these big organizations, things like Steam or Good Old Games, for example, also offers users the opportunity to make their own lists. They have realized that that is a problem, and they are providing tools which will break sooner or later. I think that everybody will hack them and all that. So in a way, the role of galleries, for example, the role of festivals, even though, you know, there's always bias in festivals and things like this, but it's a matter of developing tools and developing communities. You know, in my case, I do care about narrative games, so I'm going to look for people who have similar tastes or that work in my same field, and those are the people that I'm going to look up. So in a way, yes, like the, you know, Steam is a mess in general, the App Store can be a mess. We are kind of saturating the market, but we also are going to we have the tools to find people who are curating the kinds of games that we want to play, if we know how to find them. So the problem is not finding the games, the problem is really finding the curators. And that's where we probably need venues, you know, from museums or maybe magazines or websites that are selecting the games for their readers.
I can speak of like a longtime creator, not necessarily of games, but there's a major problem both as a consumer and as a creator of that you don't know your audience and your audience doesn't know you, and it's actually frightening. I'm serious. It's like it's painful to know that you'll be working on something for 4 years and you'll be spending like giving up income, you know, doing whatever it takes to get a game out or whatever creation is, and you know, it may fail, like, because the barrier of entry, and you know, like in the Apple Store, for example, if you don't make it the first week, you just don't make it. Like in terms of numbers, it is sort of a power law tool. It's sort of a power law analysis. You will make the most that you will make in the first 2 weeks, and then it will drop. If anyone hasn't watched Indie Game the movie, that's a really, really good reference to how it happened. Super Meat Boy was a really was like a really unique case in that like it was successful after 3 days rather than 1 because it might have failed by then. So I'd like to equate this to the music industry, which is in the shits, like, and it has been for years, in the sense that you know, like indie music has become really, really mainstream, but you know, it's like there are a lot of consumers now, thanks to blogs and thanks to like actually the understanding that indie music is not really that indie, and like a lot of people can like it. But there's also not a lot, like, you know, even after knowing your audience, because of your distribution tools, because you're going through Spotify or something like that, you're not actually able to make a living out of being just a game maker, which is why I'm not a full-time game maker, and I do this in my hobbies. You know, like I work for advertising, which sucks. But I'm sorry, man, it's true. So yeah, and like it's not that my advertising agency sucks, it does not. But like generally, you know, having to do this sort of thing, like having patrons and not having someone pay directly for your work, that is not nice. But one tool that can rescue that is like the same way that music blogs existed. Now, like there are a lot of gaming blogs that actually communicate, you know, certain games, and the gaming community is actually surprisingly sophisticated in that way that it will talk about clever games. It will talk about ideas rather than catchiness or anything else. Like No Man's Sky, which is a game that is taking its idea out of it, taking the idea of like, you know, an infinite explorable universe that is actually, you know, it is a multiplayer experience, but you have a chance of not ever meeting anyone. That's really clever. And taking that away from it and just leaving it as a game that you fly spaceships around, that would have competed with absolutely like every other game. And just putting it in context of like, oh, this is something really clever actually, and everybody should look at it, like a lot of blogs did, made that game really successful, like even now before it started. And I really think that is the model that we should keep pursuing, but because if blogs can catch that, we can have more interesting games, like in diversity, and also you will be rewarded for making something special. Yeah, sorry.
My background's in the film world, and I think relating this to the game world as well, where you have such an opportunity as a game maker, independent game maker, and independent filmmaker to find your audience while you're developing the project. And so I think these days being an indie filmmaker is also being a marketer, and being an indie game maker is also being a marketer, and connecting with your audience and having them know you, that by the time it comes out, you're not at the whims of Steam or distribution channels. You already have your market, and I think that's where the landscape is, and unfortunately I don't think many filmmakers or game makers want to be marketers, but I think that's the reality of taking the power back to yourself.
Right, well, thanks a lot, everyone, for coming. Thanks to all of our panelists.
And thank you to the developers of Microsoft and for letting us take over your space for like an hour. Please play those games before you do anything else because they're great and they're beautiful. So thank you guys. Thank you for the panel for coming.